Hello everyone, my name's Christine Outred and I'm a member of the Awards Committee of the Children's Book Council of Australia, speaking today from Wadawurrung Country. It's my great pleasure to introduce this session as we celebrate the pleasure and power of First Nations stories and literature. Today's session is a discussion on the importance of First Nations stories being recognised by Children's Book Awards. Award-winning author Sue Lawson will be facilitating this discussion with co-author Aunty Muir and publisher Rachel Bin Salleh from Magabala Books. The eloquence, artistry and understated power of their collaboration for the Our Place series, including family, respect and sharing, is undeniable. And Sue and Aunty Faye have an equally beautiful new work, Country, recently published. Thank you all so much for sharing this discussion with us, and I'll now hand over to Sue to facilitate the session.
Christine, thank you very much. I just want to start by acknowledging Ngāi Tuam on Wadawurrung Country and recognise the elders past, present and those starting to step up, and thank them for their continual care for our beautiful country. It's a great place to live and learn and play. I love it. I'd like to introduce, first of all, I'll start with Rachel. Rachel is a Nimmerberg and Yawuru woman from the Kimberley. She's been publishing for over 20 years. She's an author and she's currently publisher at Magabala. She has the misfortune of working with Faye and I. Thank you for joining us, Rachel.
My pleasure.
And Aunty Faye Muir, Aunty Faye OAM, because she never says it, so I'm going to say it. She's a Budawurrung, Wamba and Wagaya elder. She's an educator, a mentor, Kuri Court elder. I could go on and on about what Aunty Faye is. She's a language expert. She's a true treasure and very luckily my friend, and I get to work with Aunty Faye as well. Aunty Faye, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sue.
Why is it important for First Nations books to be recognised in awards?
Because what we consider important and culturally important is not necessarily what the majority of Australia would value. So by having First Nations award is not like an award for participating, but it is recognition of history. It is recognition of voice and voice in all its forms, and it's not necessarily by definition of what society that we live in now considers important, but also as what First Nations people consider important in their voice and in the way that it needs to be told by them, which is often in and of itself is hard for maybe individuals that don't necessarily experience the culture to understand. So I think it's important because it fundamentally recognises First Nations stories and allows individuals and the collective to take up space and to be heard.
Right. Aunty Faye, do you want to add anything to that?
I'd just like to say that what Rachel has been saying takes on everything, because our voice needs to be told, our stories need to be told, and starting with younger children, for them to understand about First Nations culture and the stories behind those that culture needs to be brought out in the open, because it's such a beautiful culture to learn about.
For non-First Nations writers, the CBCA award is like the Holy Grail. If you win that, you are unbelievably, your book's recognised, it means success for your books. For First Nations people, that success, like for you, Aunty Faye, and for your writers, Rachel, it's far greater than that, isn't it? Do you want to talk about the significance of that recognition for your writers, Rachel? Because Magabala has had so many awarded.
Yes. What needs to be said is that there are certain awards that you can win, and then there are certain awards that allow the individuals who author or illustrate, let's say the children's picture books, it allows them a platform of longevity that is otherwise not available to them. Because what happens, in public, I'm speaking from a publishing perspective. So I have a commercial and cultural imperative when I publish books as well. So I'm speaking from that perspective. The most important thing, let's say if one of our titles happens to be awarded CBCA, what happens is that it is a great recognition and a great honour for our creators to be recognised in the way that society at large defines success. So that in and of itself is very, very important, because as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we live outside the norm constantly. When I publish something, we publish outside the norm constantly. And what's not seen in the book and in the winning of a title is the sheer amount of work that goes into what's being written, what's being illustrated, how it's being said, the platform that it sits on, and most importantly, the respecting of voice in the way that that First Nations people can see that it's First Nations.
Yes.
So by and large, it is honouring of author and illustrator. But after that, what happens is it allows those titles to have an extended shelf life in the trade section of the community, which means that normal mum and dad might not have anything to do with Aboriginal people, no idea about it. They'll pick up a book and they'll just say, oh, this is beautiful. Look, it's one. Let's take it home and read it. And by doing that, having access to culture in that way is not hard. And then the most important thing, apart from the award itself, is the monetary value, not necessarily, but, of awards for the economic baseline for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are at the bottom of the food chain normally, and also at the economic food chain. And it allows access to the education market in a way that librarians and teachers embrace what the book is and support it in a way that allows children, which I consider the future really of reading, to embrace what's in the title itself.
But if we take it a step further, should there be a First Nations award in the CBC?
I don't think so, because, with our authors, they are so up there with everybody else. They can write and get their stories out there to go side by side. And it's just making sure that the judges understand the voice which is in that story. It's a First Nations voice. And I think, we as writers and storytellers, getting our stories out there and into the wider community, through school, through library, is really important. And I think when somebody picks up our books, it's not, that one in First Nations section, or, it's different. I think just having them in the whole gamut of authors is really good.
Yeah. Rachel, do you agree with having First Nations books judged within the whole gamut, the whole cohort?
I completely hear what Aunty Faye is saying, and that's my most logical take, is that yes, it should be there with everyone else. But because I have been a bookseller and I have worked in a bookshop, and it is so hard. It's really complex and it is really nuanced, because we haven't been allowed space for many, many years. And what happens in an industry that is not necessarily sympathetic or empathetic to First Nations people in general, to overcome obstacles in lots of ways, we need to have a platform that allows the recognition of First Nations individuals and parties to be able to take up space in that platform. You know, sometimes a sticker on the front, you know, does help in a way to be able to reach individuals, like, you know, in society in general, to access that information just whilst they are there. And also as a bookseller, society in large wants complex issues distilled down to categories. And so it's always good to let those categories help the First Nations voices or diverse voices, or people from a minority background who do not have the platform or the voice to be able to access what, you know, mainstream society considers normal. So whilst we are starting the recognition now, it is important to take up space in that way, because, you know, we are extraordinarily talented bunch of people, you know, so yeah.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the judging of awards. I wonder, do judges have the knowledge, the cultural background to be able to assess First Nations books and pick what are the ones that teachers will say to you all the time, what are the ones that are accurate, what are the ones that reflect First Nations culture correctly? Aunty Faye, how do we make sure that judges do have that knowledge?
I think judges really need to listen to First Nations people first of all, but also go on a journey of, you know, learning a bit more from First Nations, like going into a cultural awareness training to understand the voice when they're looking at a book, because, you know, the diversity within our people are so different from, you know, from say next door to up in the north and over to the west and to the east. So they've got to understand when they're judging a book where the author comes from, and understand that that voice that comes from there and that story that comes from there, as well as the illustrator as well, where they come from within and how that all fits into the story that's before them.
So complex. I can, in Victoria alone, is it 38 or 42 different?
44 different languages.
44 different languages, and that's just in Victoria. And so, you know, how does somebody judge whether Yordi Order is depicted properly in a Wurundjeri book? It's so complex. Rachel, what do you think about that, about judges having cultural training?
In an ideal world, like, you know, that would be perfect, but it's not always often possible. Especially for some awards, judges are volunteers, and for whatever reason, they happen to be there. I think the best way forward is that if you are judging, let's say, a First Nations award, it would be imperative to have 1 or 2 First Nations judges alongside of a cohort of a mix of judges. And the only reason being is First Nations people can generally sniff out whether something is on the nose or not. By having or opening the judging process to, you know, having First Nations individuals on the judging panel, what it does is also strengthens the integrity of the award in ways that is hard to articulate, because by you know, it's not also about having First Nations authors and illustrators there and being judged by that, but it's also about the process, because the process is just as important as the outcome. So at Magabala, we would rather get it right than be first at anything. Do you know what I mean? So the process should inform the outcome. And by having First Nations judges on board, you sit in the integrity of honouring voice in ways that non-First Nations people might not necessarily understand, because they don't have the lived experience of First Nations lives.
What sort of things separate First Nation cultural books from non-First Nation? What sort of things should we be looking for? And if you want to talk about the language, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's the language that we as First Nations people use, and we write it down the way it sounds. And, you know, somebody might not like that, the way it's written, and think, you know, that's not English. So when we're looking at our books, we'll write it the way the kids say it, and they then they'll pick up a book and read it, because it's in the language that they understand.
And I know for our books, you know, our first book, Respect, you went through not literally with a red pen and went, get rid of that, get rid of this, because it's not in our language. And yet to the Western eye, that's not written with correct grammar.
It's not in English grammar, that's right.
Yeah, so that's important. Rachel, what about with illustrations?
It really is up to the illustrator and their particular style. So when we go to publish a book, we might have just a sense of the illustrations that we would like. And so what happens is we'll ask maybe, you know, an illustrator if they're interested in to do that, and show them the manuscript. And if they're comfortable with illustrating the manuscript, then we allow them the creativity to express themselves in their First Nations experience and in their First Nations context, to reflect the words. So let's say Respect, your Aunty Faye, and so your collaboration, that was really important to you, and you went about doing your collaboration in a completely ethical way that suited you. The illustration, on the other hand, is a totally different process, because it is, once again, all this is subjective. So it is really about the strength of the illustrator and allowing them to sit in their strengths to be able to call on their own lived experience to reflect what the text may be saying. You know, and sometimes we've got you know, illustrators that lean on a more traditional looking form of illustration, and then we've got illustrators that don't.
Is there anything you wanted to finish up with, just a nutshell to finish up, you know, looking at the importance of First Nation stories being recognised by children's books?
Just make sure that we get more of them in there.
Beautiful. And Rachel, did you want to wrap it up just with a final thought?
Oh, look, I think the most important genre in publishing in general is children's picture books, and the most important reading audience really are children. And it is really great to see the CBCA do really great work in this area.